Hello and welcome back to the Ninox Programming Training Series. In this class, we're going to take a deep dive into the if-then structure. We've seen the if-then structure before in previous classes when we used it to control output via a formula or to determine whether or not a certain field was visible or invisible on screen. But in this class, I want to really study the if-then structure. The if-then is one of four different structures available in the Ninox language. Two of those structures are option structures, the if-then and the switch case. The other two structures are repetitive structures, the while-do and the for-do, sometimes called the for-next. We'll look at those other structures in the following classes, but let's dive in and really see how that if-then structure works, and let's look at best practices for how to use the if-then. Now, we've enhanced our product table since the last class by adding an item status field. If an item is available, then we see in the next available date that it's available right now. That's our current date. Let us say that an item was temporarily unavailable and we didn't expect to have it back in stock until about the end of the next month. We place a purchase order and the order is now shipped, and the supplier said we can expect the order to get here by the 15th of next month. Now here we are today, and the order arrives almost a month ahead of schedule. So when I go to an available status, the next available date changes to today, right now, because it's available right now. The visibility of this field is controlled by the item status. Note what happens if the item is discontinued. The availability date disappears entirely because it's never going to be available again. If it is not discontinued, which means it's available, back ordered, in a restock, or even temporarily unavailable, then the next available date will be visible. So here we set up our choice field with 5 choices. And let's very quickly look at how those choices are structured. Choice 1 is special because if it's choice 1 available, we don't enter the date. The date automatically becomes today. If it's choice 5, then it doesn't matter because the date field isn't even visible. Which leaves us with the final option. It could be a 2, a 3, or a 4. And in this case, the field is visible, but unlike in available status, we are going to put the date in when the stock will become next available to us. So here we see field level code at the next available date field in the display field only if area. And this code specifically states that the numeric value of the current item status will be stored in a variable called X status. X status can exist in one of 3 states. It can be equal to 1, it can be greater than 1 but less than or equal to 4, or it can be none of those things, which means it has to be equal to 5, unavailable, so none of this matters because the field won't be visible. If the status is greater than 1 and at the same time less than or equal to 4, then whether or not to display the field, the next available date field, the answer is true. Yes, display it. If, however, the status is not greater than 1 and less than or equal to 4, then we evaluate a second status option. Is it equal to 1 or is it not equal to 1? If it is equal to 1, then it still remains true that I do want to display the field. If it's not 1, and we've already determined that it's not less than or equal to 4, and since the field can't be blank, it has to be 5, and if it's 5, that means the item status is discontinued, which means the answer to the question, do I want to display the next available date field, is false. The field will be invisible. But there's something else happening. Let us note that in this temporarily unavailable state, the next available date is blank. We don't know when it's going to be available again. All of a sudden, a shipment shows up on our doorstep and we can start selling it again. So the status becomes available. And then instantaneously, the next available date becomes today. How did that happen? Well, remember from our first class where we talked about where we can place our code, and there were different levels: application level, table level, field level. Well, here we see two levels of code, both operating at the same time on the same field. At the field level, here is an if-then structure that controls whether or not the field is visible. But at the table level, there is another if-then structure in operation. And it's in the trigger after update option, which means this if-then statement will be evaluated and the results incorporated into our form view every time something changes on the form. And this specific piece of code says we're going to have another variable called item status, and it also is going to contain the numeric value of the item status choice field. If the item status is available, which means the numeric value is 1, then in the next available date field, install today's date. If, however, it is not 1, then it doesn't matter what else it is. If it's not available now, then don't do anything. Now, when we're in a situation where something should happen if this, but nothing's going to happen if that, the else clause becomes optional. We can simply say this: if it's available, then the next available date is today, and if it's not available, don't do anything at all. So we have table level if-then structures controlling the content of the field, while we have field level if-then structures controlling the visibility of the field. Let's talk very quickly about if-then best practices. Let's create an if-then structure based on a variable. We'll say the variable equals 1. If the variable equals 1, then true. If it doesn't equal 1, then 4. And I'll end the structure. Now, this red box tells me I have an error. If I hover over the box, I'm getting the mismatch error. And what that is saying is I have broken a rule. And the rule is that in an if-then structure, if you have chosen to include an else return, the type of return must be the same as what gets returned in the if. Here, we are returning a true. The only other thing that we could return would be a false. We can't return a number because this is a logical and that's a numeric. I can't return a letter because that's a logical and that's text. Whatever you return in the if section of an if-then, the true section, must be of the same type of what gets returned in the else section if there is one. So I could, for example, if x var equals 1, I could return the value yes, and if it doesn't equal 1, I could return the value no. There's no error because this is text and that is text. What if I want to return the value yes if the evaluation returns a true statement, and I want to return a 1 if the evaluation returns a false statement? Well, I'm getting this error again because this is text, that's numeric, and we know now that there's a rule that says that in if, then, else structure, what gets returned when the if is true must be of the same type that what gets returned when the structure is false. But what I can do is I can either enclose that digit 1 in double quotes, turning it into text, or I can declare that to be a text value using a declaration statement, we can declare values explicitly to be text, numbers, or dates. And we'll talk more about declaring variables and declaring variable types in a future class. But this still works. This is text, no error. Let me show you another common mistake that we want to avoid according to the best practices, and that is the nest of if-then structures. Here we see that if this is the case, return a 1. If that's not the case, then see what else it is, and maybe it's that. If it's not this, it's that. And if it's that, give us a 2. But if it's not this and it's not that, then it might be the other thing, and then give us a 3. And if it's not any of these 3 things, it could be something else, and we want a 4. And if it's none of these 4 things, then it could be another thing, and we want a 5. You should never embed more than one if-then inside of another if-then. Let's go back and review what we did before. Here we see one if-then structure embedded inside of another if-then structure. That's okay. It's going to look at this and see if it's true. And if it's not, it'll look at that. Now, technically, you should never embed one if-then inside of another if-then, but this is not going to cause you any real problems. However, when we start nesting lots of if-thens, one after another, inside of one master if-then statement, we're going to start having performance issues. And that is because every if-then must be evaluated before the code will stop running. So let us say that something is this. This is a true statement. Is it this? The answer is yes. Okay, I want to get a 1 back. I already know what's true, and what's true is this. All of this is false. However, because of the way I've embedded and nested all of these additional if-then statements, even though I already know what I want, Ninox will check this one, and that one, and that one, and then finally this one, before it gives me back the one that I knew I wanted up here on line 7. Ninox will run through another 14 lines of code just to find out that in those 14 lines of code, nothing needs to happen. In a situation where you're going to be nesting 2 or 3 or 4 choices, it could be this or that, it could be another thing or something else, use the case switch structure, which we're going to dive into in our next class. When you've got 1 or 2, or maybe 3 choices, go ahead and use 1 if-then, or possibly 2 if that works best for you. But if you start getting into a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th if-then-else structure, you're nesting too many, the performance of your Ninox database will suffer, and you're starting to get away from best practices in how you program and build your Ninox code. In the next class, we're going to get into the case switch structure, the other evaluation or option structure, and we're going to see how to program Ninox to make choices when maybe there's 10, 11, or 12 things to pick from, and we don't want to nest 10, 11, or 12 if-then statements. I'll see you in that class. Visit us at www.nioxis.com. Here, you can learn about different Ninox solutions. You can get tech support through our Ninox Help Desk, which is available 7 days a week, or you can schedule private one-on-one concierge sessions for training, or we can help you build your application. And if you haven't done so already, sign up for our free Ninox Learning Lab. We do this every Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. in the UK, 6 p.m. Central European Time. These free hour-long sessions enable you to learn more about Ninox, features, functions, and solutions. We have open Q&A where you can get answers to all your Ninox questions. and you can meet other members of the global Ninox community. We look forward to seeing you there.